الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Let the Quran Speak. My name is Sophia, I'm your host. There seems to be so much killing in so many parts of the world that one can get into the mindset of thinking that human life is cheap and that human suffering is not as important as it should be. How can we cultivate a respect for human life and for the value of human life? We'll be looking at that later in the show. Also, we'll be talking to Basma Sultan. She is the founder of Speak Out. She organizes spoken word competitions that aim to eradicate racism and build bridges across cultures. We'll be looking at that interview later in the show, and we'll end with a question and answer period in which you ask your questions and we'll try to answer them. With me is Brother Shabir Ali from the Islamic Information Center. Brother Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
Now, let's talk about this question of the respect for human life, because we look at situations across the world, for example, in Syria, where many people are being killed, murdered, raped, in Palestine, where people are victims of rocket fire, in Afghanistan, where many civilians were killed by a U.S. soldier. And so one can get into the mindset of thinking, well, who cares? You know, there's so much killing going on around the world. I can't care about all these situations. So how do we get back to the idea that human life is important, is valuable?
Well, it's hard to maintain many of our moral principles in the light of our changing and dynamic world. So many things are happening all at once. We become privy to all of this information from all around the world, much of which we can do nothing about, and eventually we can become numb to this sort of information. So we hear that somebody died and we say, oh, yeah, so what? Life goes on.
It just becomes a number.
Exactly. So we have to guard against that. We have to continually return to our first principles and bear in mind what are the important things in life. And yes, life is important. Life is sacred. And we should be appalled by all of the killing that's going on, whether it's in Syria, in Afghanistan, or in Palestine, or anywhere else in the world for that matter.
And I guess it shouldn't matter whether it's in the West or in the East where that happens, because sometimes people tend to think, okay, if it's not in the West, it doesn't matter. Or, you know, if people are dying or suffering in parts of Africa, for example, or parts of the Middle East, well, who, you know, they're far away from us. They're so different from us. So we can't really relate to them.
Well, this is where the scriptures do come in useful in guiding us into the proper way of thinking. The Bible says, thou shalt not murder. And it's not that you shouldn't just murder somebody close to you. It's anywhere in the world. And the Quran tells us in Surah 5, verses number 31 and 32, that if you save a life, then this is like you saved the whole a whole race. And if you were to kill someone, it's like killing a whole race as well, because you have to think not only of the person that you're killing, but also of all of the potential descendants of this person multiplied many times, but you know, from generation to another as the population grows exponentially.
My understanding is that this verse is also common in the Jewish tradition, and perhaps in other traditions as well. So you mentioned that life is sacred. Where does that idea come from? Is it a religious idea?
Well, yes. The Quran speaks about God creating Adam and blowing into him something of his spirit. So human beings are not just simply part of the animal kingdom. Yes, we share many features with animals. But the human consciousness that we have, that consciousness that brings us into a close relationship with our Creator, that is something special. That is what is referred to as the ruh, or the spirit. And it is said that God blew that into Adam, and the Bible says, thus Adam became a living soul. So the life of human beings then becomes very sacred, something to be cherished and not to be snuffed out as we see happening so often these days.
In the Muslim tradition, does the sacredness of life extend even to non-Muslims, to all human beings?
Yes, of course. This, when it says that God created Adam in this way, and we are all descendants of Adam, both Muslims and non-Muslims, so everyone shares the same sort of spirit of Adam, which is a divine spirit.
Now, sometimes when we look at people dying or people suffering or people hurting in different parts of the world, or even in Canada, we think that we're better than them, or we're superior to them in some way, and therefore, their lives don't matter as much. How would the religious tradition refer to that, or how would it respond to that?
Well, first of all, I think it is important to recognize that this is quite natural. I mean, people feel more for the loss that is closer to them. A loss in our own families is affecting us more than the loss in somebody else's family. But while that is natural, I think we need to step back, see the broader picture, and recognize that the loss in anyone's family, whether it is somebody down the block from where we live, or on the same block or down the street from where we live, or whether it's somebody in some remote part of the world, it's still a human life. It is still sacred. It should still matter to us, and we should still do something to change our world, make it a better place, a more peaceful place, a safer environment for children to grow up in and to actually grow up, to live, to see adulthood, and also for people to live in safety and in security.
You said we should do something. Do you think we have a duty to help other people who might be suffering?
Absolutely. Part of the reason we're getting numbed into this, we're being lulled by our own comforts, and we're thinking, okay, it's happening somewhere else, it doesn't really affect us, is because we have forgotten that we have a responsibility. We're not active with this. We just take the news as something that we enjoy. It's the last thing we watch before we go to sleep, the 11 o'clock news.
The first thing we read in the morning.
Exactly. And so we read the news in the morning, and then we go off to our own business, whether it be work or school, and we watch all the horror again at night, and then we go to bed to enjoy our night's sleep before the next day of activity. So we're into this routine, and we do nothing about this. So eventually it becomes now second place, that we just know that this is happening, but we do nothing. And by knowing and doing nothing, we are in fact placing ourselves into that road of complacency.
So what should we do? I mean, we get the news, and we have very little control over the news that we're receiving. And at the same time, there's so many things happening in different parts of the world that it's hard to figure out what one can possibly do to change the situation.
I think this is a difficult part as well, and hence my answer is not as forthcoming as one might hope. But there are many different things that people can do, and not everyone will necessarily do the same thing. We have read, for example, about a Canadian woman who was in Palestine, devoting her life to, or many years of her life to serving the people there, and defending. Yes, and defending the cause of those who have been oppressed. And so this is one way. One might become an activist, even to the extent of going abroad into the heart of the activity, to speak out for injustices, to observe, to report, and so on. Another way is living among people just simply to serve them. Sometimes we read of an individual who came from another part of the world. They're here in Canada. They have gained a very respectable degree in their field. And then they decide, okay, I want to go back and serve my people. So that means this person is making a tremendous sacrifice, giving up all of the comforts that we know of about life in Canada, that we know about as being part of the life in Canada. And then that person decides, okay, because I have knowledge of how to repair vision, I'll go back and help my people those who are suffering from vision loss or whatever it might be. So they open a clinic, they offer their services, they will earn very little in that new environment, or well, it's an environment which they're largely already familiar with, but it's a change from the Canadian situation. Somebody is sacrificing here. Now, I'm not saying that this is an option open for everybody, but by talking about it, I hope that some people will be inspired to pick this as an option for themselves. Most of us can donate to the cause of those who are suffering elsewhere, and we can speak to our local representation and insist that they do something about the suffering in other parts of the world.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you, Brother Shabir.
You're welcome.
We'll take a break. When we return, we shift to an interview that I've done with Besma Sultan, the founder of Speak Out.